now you can get it. Now you can get it through your public libraries in many cases from their streaming services of Canopy or Hoopla. So that's a really nice way to have the conversation with somebody new. I think it's on Amazon Prime now too.
Very good. Okay. See, I would like to welcome our guest, Cece Doucette. She's the most knowledgeable person that I know about EMFs. And welcome, Cece. I'm looking forward to hearing you.
Very good. Well, thank you so much, Ellen. And, you know, I just got a pretty good head start on most people. So if anything that I've learned in the last 9 years can help others, then I would be very grateful. Dennis, could I ask you the favor of giving me screen sharing privileges?
Sure. No. You should have it.
It's still giving me host disabled participant screen sharing. I think if you go to the screen share button on the bottom.
I don't have it on the bottom. I have it on the top. But
okay.
It's screen share. Yeah.
And then it usually says that you can grant that access to everybody or to whomever. There we go.
There you go.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Yes. Okay, now I'm viewing your screen. So let's see if we can get you to stop that screen share. Okay, now let me see if I can screen. No, I'm still disabled. Oh, sorry, Dennis, you're muted, so I can't actually hear you if you're saying anything right now.
I said, I don't know why it's not happening.
Okay, one other option may be to go into the participants and next to my name, click the more button. And then you can, I think, appoint me as co-host.
That I can do.
And that might give me screen sharing.
That should do it.
All right. Yeah,
Finally.
Well, we love technology when it's working right and safely. So I'm going to enlarge my, can everybody see my slides here now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'll provide you with my slides at the end of this, and you are more than welcome to put them up with the video on your website. So that MTPW after my name just means that I had the privilege of earning a master's in technical and professional writing from Northeastern University. And that's what I was happily doing, was tech writing, before this issue found me. And I used to run the local education foundation here in Ashland, Massachusetts, at the time when we were hearing about this 21st century classroom and how our kids were going to need all this great technology to succeed in our world. And so I ran, gosh, I think 8 campaigns to get wireless infrastructure, to get iPads and Chromebooks and smart boards and minis. And then one night at book group, a girlfriend of mine who's an electrical engineer tipped me off that there could be biological effects. So that's where my journey began. And so I sought out the peer-reviewed published scientific literature. And I'll tell you, I was just astonished to find that there are literally thousands of studies all over the world showing very serious biological effects. And we'll go into the science in a minute. So I started the conversation with my schools, and it was not an easy conversation to have, because we've all been told by the industry that all Wi-Fi all the time is the way to go. But we became the first in the nation to even have this little sign in our classrooms that says, you know, turn off these devices when you're not using them, turn the Wi-Fi on only when needed, always place the mobile device on a solid surface and keep your distance. So that was my first. And I didn't realize it at the time that we were the first in the nation in a school district to actually do this. So then I worked with my state senator, and she and I had worked for years together on our local education foundation, running these campaigns to get wireless in. And when I brought the facts to her, she put me in touch with an attorney in her office, and we crafted a bill to form a commission to investigate this issue. I can't tell you what happens in politics in Massachusetts, but I had the exact same conversation with a state rep in New Hampshire, and he actually introduced a bill, brought us in to testify, and we got that bill passed into law in just 7 months to investigate the health and environmental impacts of today's wireless technology. And here we've had legislation in Massachusetts for, I want to say 8 or 9 years now, and we've never gotten it to the point where we took any meaningful action. On this journey, I've had the incredible privilege to connect with many of the world's leading scientists and doctors whose life's work is microwave radiation, which is what these electromagnetic fields are. So you'll hear different ways to describe this man-made radiation. It can be microwave radiation, it could be electromagnetic fields, it could be radio frequency radiation. So all those things mean today's man-made wireless education. So I was asked to partner with some of the experts, and we realized that you can't fix this problem until people know about it. So that's where we started doing education. And we created this little nonprofit out of Europe called Wireless Education, where we've distilled this issue down into very easy courses that can be completed online in about a half an hour for schools and families and for the corporate workplace, so that literally on your lunch hour, your whole company could be trained on what the risks are and what they might choose to do to use their technology, but much more safely. So ultimately, when I started getting together with others around the state, I decided to establish Massachusetts for Safe Technology. And we meet once a month. Anybody is welcome to come to our monthly meetings. It's usually the third Wednesday of the month at noon. We just had our meeting today at noon. But for so many people who get harmed and are the lucky ones to figure out that this is what's taking their health down, it can be a very lonely journey. So it's very empowering to come to these meetings and listen to the inroads that people are making throughout their towns and their schools and their legislatures to actually get to safe technology. I like to include this link. I was asked by somebody down at the National Institutes of Health to co-chair the technology panel for the Health in Buildings Roundtable Conference a couple of years ago. And I like to share this link because we were limited. We only had 10 minutes each to speak on our panel. So I gave the opening remarks, and then we had Dr. Martin Paul, who's one of the world's leading scientists on this. And then we had Frank Clegg, who is the retired president of Microsoft Canada. He retired and then went and researched all of this and figured out that we in North America are not safe. And then we had Theodora Scorado, who's the executive director of a group called the Environmental Health Trust that arguably has the largest database in the world on this wireless issue. And then we had a gentleman named Peter Sullivan, and I had seen a talk that Peter was giving. He's a philanthropist, but he had been a former fighter pilot for our government, and his health began to crash. His teeth started breaking. He lost too much weight. And when his sons came onto the preschool years, they were both diagnosed with autism. And typically a family with an autistic child will look to the food and remove all of the toxins from the food and get on a clean organic diet. They might also choose to do the heavy metal detox and get all that out of the child's system. And what Peter discovered is that if you can turn off all the wireless radiating transmissions, that's the first thing he now recommends. There's a pediatrician, Dr. Toril Gelter, out in California, who does a 12-hour night detox with the families in her care. And she sees remarkable improvement in the children, even autistic kids. And Peter's children, after he figured out what was harming them, and they were lucky that they had the de novo mutations, meaning that it did not come from mom or dad in their genetics. It was something environmental. And quite often when you remove those environmental toxins, you see significant inroads. And Peter's sons today are now, I think, in their 20s, and neither one of them are on the autism spectrum anymore. And I didn't even know that was an option, that you could get somebody off the autism spectrum. So lots of really rich and incredible information at your fingertips. And that's the nice thing, is once you know to look, you will be just shocked at how much information, credible, peer-reviewed scientific literature is out there. One of the gaps that we had when I fell down the rabbit hole with this in 2013 is that far too many people were being misdiagnosed because we had no way to train our doctors and our nurses and our first responders. And now we have this incredible gift in the Electromagnetic Fields Medical Conference. It was called 2021, but that, as you'll recognize, was right in the middle of the pandemic. So we were supposed to meet in Scottsdale, Arizona for the conference. We had to pivot and go into a virtual platform. And so all of the talks were done pre-recorded in advance. And then during the actual conference, we had live panel discussions with the experts. So all of that training has just been reaccredited because the information is still as relevant today as it was in 2021. This training for 24.5 continuing medical education credits for doctors and 24.5 continuing education credits for nurse. It's two separate accreditations. This will all be available until May of 2023. So as with all the other conversations we have around this topic, it typically comes down to you and I bringing the information forward, giving them some space and time to look into it. But these resources are just incredible today, and we didn't even have them a decade ago. So the reason why my school became the first in the nation to even have that sign in our classrooms was when they looked at the fine print that comes with all of our devices. So at this point in the presentation, I would like to welcome you to take out, if you have an iPhone, take your iPhone out. Okay. And when you get into your iPhone, go into settings and then scroll down just a little ways and hit general. Okay, so there's a website also that shows us the fine print that's been in there all along, but from settings to general, on a really old phone, you would hit about, but most people have upgraded. So from general, scroll all the way down near the bottom to legal and regulatory. And when you hit legal and regulatory, about 4 items down on the menu, you'll see RF exposure. That's this radio frequency radiation we talked about. And in that legal fine print, it tells us a couple of really important things. One, this device was tested at a distance from the body. So basically, don't put it anywhere near your body, not in your hand, not in your bra, not in your suit or shirt pocket, not in your waistband, not in your back pocket. It's telling you in that legal fine print that if you put this anywhere on your body, you're going to exceed the FCC's limits for public radiation exposure. Those limits, by the way, were never safety tested for biological effects. And then in the next paragraph, they recommend you use a hands-free option. And they suggest speakerphone or a headset. You don't want to have any kind of metal up to your head when you're dealing with radiation, because metal causes the radiation to amplify. But there are products out on the market called hollow tube or air tube headsets that just have rubber and plastic that goes into your head. If you're putting earbuds, you're putting a microwave transmitter on both sides of your brain, and it's sending signal right through your brain. And then it's also communicating with your phone or your laptop or your tablet and emitting radiation there too. So look for a hollow tube or an air tube headset. And that's been in there all along, and nobody knows that legal fine print warning has been there. So I had a hard time with this because it's invisible. And if COVID has taught us anything, we need to be vigilant about the invisible exposures in our environment. So I went back to my girlfriend, Wendy, who tipped me off about all this. And I said, Wendy, how do I get my mind around this? And we did a really crude experiment with a transistor radio that allowed us to go in between stations and pick up the signals from the radiation emitted from our wireless devices. And then I discovered there are actually professional grade meters that one can purchase. And so I went after a grant in my community here in Ashland. And we became, it wasn't easy. It took me 3 tries. Again, this is not an easy journey, but there are successes. Took me 3 tries, but we became the first in the United States to have this radio frequency detection meter on loan in our public library. Anybody with an Ashland library card can take it out. And then a doctor in Newton and I went after a state level cultural grant. And we got another one of these meters placed on loan in Newton that anybody with a Minuteman library card can take out. And then out in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, the industry, Verizon, put a cell tower right on top of a neighborhood, just as everybody was being sent home to live in your house for 24/7 during the pandemic. 20 people in that neighborhood got very ill, children, adults. One person who had licked their cancer, the cancer came back, that person has now died. This cell tower has been transmitting for 2 years. 2 others in that community developed cancers. Many developed microwave sickness to the point where they've had to abandon their homes. These little girls were vomiting into buckets at night. The dog was vomiting. The pollinators have all disappeared from the gardens. And our bodies cannot adapt to these levels of microwave radiation. Everybody's body is different. Some people feel it sooner rather than later. But we don't feel cancers coming on. We don't feel infertility coming on. And we'll look at the science in just a minute. So Pittsfield Public Library, for anybody who might be in that library network, you can go borrow this Safe and Sound Pro 2 meter. And this is the one that was recommended at the medical conference for doctors to put in their practice. And there's a chiropractor up on the North Shore of Massachusetts who did just that. She loans it out to her patients for $10. She gives them 2 hours and says, you have to have it back in 2 hours. Go home and measure, see what your exposures are, and come right back. So I have one of those meters as well. And so I'd like to give you a demonstration of what this invisible toxin looks like. So here in my home, you see that it's in the green. That's where we want to be. The unit of measurement on this meter is a microwatt per square meter. And in the scientific literature, they want us to be at 10 or less in our indoor spaces. And in your sleeping areas, they want you to be at 0.1 or less. So let me show what happens. So right now, my house is at a maximum of 4.3. Let me show you what happens though when I take my cell phone out of airplane mode, and I keep it in airplane mode as a rule, and I only use it in emergencies on the road. I use a landline for everything else. See how it's topping off at the end of the chart there? This is just one device, right? One device. I'm just going to put this back in airplane mode because I don't like this radiation very well. Just turning that phone on, we went up to 523,000 microwatts per square meter. And the science is telling us that we need to be under 10 to stay in homeostasis. So that's what our world has become with this incredible amount of electrosmog. And it's not rocket science to fix. You know, most of us probably have a box in our basement full of Ethernet cables, right? Just run the Ethernet cable to the back of your router. And who knew, for your phones, you can buy these little adapters and just plug them in. So anything you do on the internet, you can do safely, and then just go into your devices and turn off the antennas. So in my cell phone, I have, I think, 6 antennas. There's a cellular, a data, a Bluetooth, a Wi-Fi, a locator, a hotspot. And for anybody who didn't know any better than to upgrade to one of these terrible 5G phones, there's a whole nother array of antennas in there. And each one of these antennas independently is sending out signals saying, here I am, where are you? Here I am, where are you? Here I am, where are you? To the nearest cell tower or router. And again, the message is not no technology, it's safe technology. And once we know a little bit better, we tend to do better. And so turn off all those antennas in your settings and only turn on the one antenna that you need at the time, and only for as little as you need it. So let's take a look at the science. Okay. Oh, I wanted to mention my cable station was so gracious. They came to my house with their cameras, and we did a 23-minute public service announcement and just walked through my house to show common exposures today, from the microwave oven, from the printer, from the keyboard, the mouse, the laptops, you know, all of it. And then I make recommendations for what you might do to lessen your exposures. So what does the science say? Let's look first at the long-term effects. And again, don't take my word on any of this. When I give you the slides, go do your own investigation into this, because we've all received so much messaging from industry that it's really hard to do the mind shift. But once you really start reading this science, most people have a big wake-up call. So this study over here is by our own government, the US National Toxicology Program, which is the gold standard on toxics research in the world. They spent 20 years working on a study expecting to prove that cell phones are safe. Instead, after an unprecedented 3-day peer review at the National Institutes of Health, they determined clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage, with additional evidence of heart tumors, brain tumors, acoustic neuromas, thyroid tumors. So the industry, as ever, will spin it and say, oh, that's just one study. You need more than one study. Well, right on the heels of our government coming out with this US National Toxicology Program study, the Ramazzini Institute in Italy came out with another large study on cell phone base stations or cell towers that corroborated everything that we found here in the US. So we don't need more science. We need to educate the public and to start removing these toxic close range exposures. So DNA, we all recognize, is the roadmap to grow a proper anything, from a child to a plant to an animal. And this is disrupting the DNA of every living cell on our planet. When I started reading the infertility studies, that was the day that I found my voice. They have taken male human sperm, exposed it to a laptop with the antennas radiating, and it changed the DNA, it slowed the motility, and it caused far fewer sperm to be viable, or apoptosis, which is programmed cell death, in just 4 hours of radiation exposure. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. My oldest daughter had just gone to college with her MacBook. Our youngest daughter had just gone in high school, and we had given her a laptop to go to high school with. And of course, where are they both using it, but right on top of their reproductive organs. And now Kaiser Permanente and others have come up with studies showing that women who use wireless technology on a regular basis have higher miscarriage rates. And so it was those infertility studies that got me moving on this issue and brought me out of my comfort zone, because I never in a million years imagined this is where I would be tonight, educating people on how to educate themselves on the risks of wireless radiation. So neurotoxicity is a big one. Even before we got into the pandemic, we were at epidemic proportions of anxiety and depression. We were seeing suicidal ideation like never before, even among children. And the science shows this is a neurotoxin. We are jackhammering, you know, a megahertz is a million, a gigahertz is a billion. So we have these signals, these microwave spikes coming at us at 1 million and 1 billion cycles per second, just jackhammering us unless we know to do something differently. And what the research shows us is that we have something called the blood-brain barrier, which is meant to keep toxins out of sensitive tissues like the brain. We also have a gut-brain barrier as well. And what the science is showing is this radiation is opening up, it's permeating these barriers. And so now, as part of our routine circadian rhythm, when we're escorting blood out through our systems, or using the blood to escort toxins out of our systems, that blood can now, with all of its toxins, take a turn and go into the brain. And so we have neurotoxicity. So ADD, ADHD, Dr. Martha Herbert, actually with the ADD, ADHD, you may want to look on that neurotoxicity page and you'll see that Dr. Hugh Taylor, who heads up the OBGYN department at Yale Medical, he has done a number of the rodent studies. And when you expose the pregnant mama mouse to radio frequency, those pups come out bouncing off the walls in their cages like they have nary a care in the world, looking just like a child with ADD, ADHD. Dr. Martha Herbert founded the Autism Lab at Mass General, and she sees huge correlations between what we know happens scientifically from microwave radiation and what's happening to the families in her care. And then Alzheimer's, it used to take about 25 years for Alzheimer's to rear its ugly head. That might have been when we were in our 70s or 80s. Now we're seeing people in their 60s, 50s, 40s, 30s, and even 20s showing up with Alzheimer's because we are radiating the brain. And it was so heartening to see that just last month, the Environmental Working Group, which many people recognize because they have a database, and they promoted their Dirty Dozen and Clean 15 with regard to pesticide usage on produce. They also have a database that tells you what kind of personal hygiene products have high chemical content and not. Well, just last month, they came out with a fact sheet over here showing the science that indicates that radio frequency radiation damages the nervous system. So it's really heartening to see this coming mainstream. And children are especially vulnerable. They are not just little adults. Their very systems, their immune system, their central nervous system, their DNA are still under development. And when you start damaging their DNA, you can expect a lot of really horrible things to happen to our children. So when we look at this diagram by Dr. Om Gandhi, these head models are turned sideways and the little yellow thing is the ear. When you put a cell phone up to the ear of a fully grown adult skull, it's penetrating with radiation into the brain about a third of the way. On a 10-year-old skull, that's going about 3/4 of the way. And on a 5-year-old child, that radiation is penetrating the brain almost the entire way through. So we should never, never, ever give a child a radiating device. If there's a game that the kid wants to play, put the phone in airplane mode, download the app, and in airplane mode, they can play with it there, but you never want to be sending signal back and forth around a child. In the short term, you guys may even recognize some of the symptoms that I'll discuss here, but please know that the Americans with Disabilities Act, they have already, way back in 2002, recognized this new term called electromagnetic sensitivity. That means that our bodies are getting overpowered by this radiation and we're seeing the fallout. So early onset microwave symptoms often include insomnia, and the science is revealing to us why that is. So as part of our normal circadian rhythm, the pineal gland in the brain releases melatonin during the wee hours of darkness. When we have microwave radiation signals pulsing at us all night, the brain sees that light energy form as the lights are on. And so it's not releasing the melatonin properly to go in and regulate sleep. And melatonin also helps to escort the toxins out of our body. So we're dysregulating a whole lot of important systems by sleeping with microwave radiation in our environment. The good news is, time and again, people come back and say, Cece, I didn't want to believe any of this. I don't want to know about it. But I recognized some of these symptoms. And so I said, why not? It's free. All you got to do is turn it off. And they come back and say, oh my gosh, I slept through the night for the first time in ages. And my mom did that when she was 92. I took my meter out to her little senior bungalow in Oregon. and I did a walkthrough, and she had the router and the digital or the decked cordless phone. She had that base station right in her little tiny bedroom. And those things were pulsating at her all night long. And I taught her how to keep her cell phone in airplane mode. And the next time I spoke to her, she said, you know, that night after you left, I slept for 10 hours. And I said, well, Mom, that's great. What do you normally do? And she said, I don't. I lie there praying I'll fall asleep. I wake up all night long. And by the time morning comes, I'm so loopy that I have to perch myself on the edge of my bed and gather my wits before I trust myself to get up and go. And she said, and ever since you came in and showed me all I needed to do, I've slept through the night every night. And she was 92 at the time. She was still driving, doing her artwork. So it can be that simple. Just turn it off. So insomnia is a big one. My own daughter was suffering from these stabbing, searing headaches. And she ultimately in high school wound up with an optical migraine. What kid should be getting a migraine, right? So it took me a while. I didn't have anybody I could talk to about this. So I circled my tail for a while, but ultimately when I decided it's my job, I got to protect my kids and my husband and myself. And we hardwired our home and got rid of all the wireless signals. My daughter's headaches went down, her nosebleeds went down. And what we've discovered through the science is there's something called the rouleau effect. And my little brain, I remember that kind of akin to the candy Rolos. So when I was little, I loved those little caramel chewy things that were stacked up in a sleeve. And with the rouleau effect, our red blood cells are meant to be free floating and oxygenating all of our biological systems. But what happens when you magnetize our blood cells with electromagnetic radiation, they start glomming up just like those Rolos, and they create this chain that looks like a stack of coins. And from there, they can't go and oxygenate our systems. So we see a lot of these symptoms come up when we can't properly oxygenate our systems. And oxidative stress is like rusting ourselves from the inside out. And it has many, many effects on various parts of our body, especially where your weakest proclivity is. For you, it might be cancer. For your neighbor, it could be heart, or it could be brain, or it could be testes, or it could be ovaries. We're all very individual. And so wherever our weakest proclivity is, that's often where these symptoms start showing up. Ear bleeds, nose bleeds, chronic fatigue is a big one where people just feel so wiped out all the time. Pain from unidentified sources, skin tingling, heating, flushing, rashes. There's a gentleman next door here in Framingham, and God bless Chuck, he's a graphic artist, and he designed our logo for us. He didn't know anything about this, but the nerves in his leg were going jiggity, and his doctor couldn't figure it out. So Chuck started doing the research to find out what could make his leg do this. Well, he discovered it was the cell phone that he kept in his pocket there all day long. It was radiating his nerves and causing nerve damage. So that's when Chuck got involved with this. Heartbeats that go too fast or too slow. We are bioelectrical beings, right? So anything, our cells whisper back and forth all day long with these electrical signaling. So when you start overpowering our poor bodies with all of this man-made energy, we can expect a lot of these strange things to happen. Cognitive impairment. You know, as we age, we naturally decline in our cognitive abilities. But what we're seeing is earlier and earlier onset of cognitive impairment. And it's a shame because it's optional for many people if they could just have a little education. I was really disheartened at the medical conference when more than one of the doctors said, because we are radiating our society, that radiation is biologically changing the gray matter and the white matter of the brain in areas where we have our executive function, decision-making, and anger, and other types of behaviors. We're changing that with this radiation. And they said we can expect to see more of these societal outbursts like the mass shootings that we've been having. And then here in Boston, just in the last couple of weeks, there were 3 different schools in Boston where children were beating on each other with their Chromebooks, the Chromebooks that are emitting toxic levels of microwave radiation. So we've got to get ahead of this. This paper by Dr. Martin Paul was a good one. Microwave frequency electromagnetic fields produce widespread neuropsychiatric effects, including depression. He pulls together these review papers on all the many studies that have been done over the years all over the world. And then, as I mentioned, the anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideation is just going off the charts these days. And as I said earlier, it's not just you and I. You can go out to the planetary impact link and see what it's doing to our poor pollinators who are getting overpowered by this, if not directly killed. It's dysregulating the navigation systems of our pollinators and of our birds. They've all got a symbiotic relationship with the earth, but now that we've introduced this huge layer of electrosmog, they're getting disoriented and their navigation systems aren't working properly anymore. So energy consumption is another big planetary concern. For those concerned with climate change, we should know that all of this wireless consumes 10 times more energy than the responsible solution, which is to just run our signals through Ethernet cables. There was a Greenpeace analyst who a decade ago said if the cloud were a country, it would be the 5th largest consumer of energy in the world. And that was a decade ago. And look how much more we have introduced into our society in that time. Mineral extraction, all of our high-tech devices have dozens of minerals that are being mined through methodologies that have a big impact on humanitarian harm, using children and others to mine these things in the Congo and treating them very badly and killing villages, and it's a nightmare. So once we understand this, we would never ditch our cell phone just because the industry came up with something newer and shinier that they want to sell us. We would commit to using things for their full and useful life cycle. The data warehouses, the networks, our own personal devices, streaming consumes huge amounts of data. Every time we send and receive, we're using energy. Every time we charge and recharge every single day, we're consuming energy. And in the background, all these apps we've been sweet talked into adopting, they're all doing updates in the background, which is once again consuming energy. So again, the message is not no technology, it's safe and responsible technology. And we do know how to get there. But one of the things that was puzzling me when I was investigating is why don't we know about this, right? And then in 2015, Harvard's Law School Center for Ethics came out with this incredible free 59-page report that you can get online called Captured Agency, How the Federal Communications Commission is Dominated by the Industries It Presumably Regulates. So basically, we have a big tobacco scenario on our hands, and this graphic that they chose for the cover of their report is the revolving door between industry and the FCC. So that was my missing puzzle piece, because I kept thinking, surely somebody's got our backs on this, as if it's as bad as what I'm reading in the peer-reviewed scientific literature. So I mentioned that $30 $30 million National Toxicology Program study that was commissioned way back when by the Food and Drug Administration. Well, after that, finding clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage, the gentleman who today heads up the radiation area at the FDA, he turned around to the FCC and said, nothing to look at here. Keep doing what you're doing. You don't need to change those public radiation exposure limits. One might ask why Dr. Jeffrey Shorin would do that. And when you investigate him a little bit, you find out that he's married to a woman who's a partner in a law firm that represents the wireless industry. So we've got conflicts all over the place. We had excellent research going on way back in the 1990s on electromagnetic fields and biological effects. But in 1996, the industry got the Telecom Act updated and they stripped control. They said, if you and your community have any concerns about environment, sorry, Charlie, nothing you can do, you can't sue us. And that's what the industry is still telling our communities, but there are many, many things that our towns can do to strengthen their local bylaws so you don't wind up with a cell tower in your yard or in your backyard. So that's all the bad news. Let's look at what we can do. So for all of the devices that are under your control, there's a little 3-step method here you can use. One, for probably less than $100, you could fix everything at home. So on the back of your router, you have Ethernet ports. Get a shielded Ethernet cable. We say shielded because there's another form of man-made electromagnetic field that comes off the wiring in your home. In commercial construction, they have to use shielded cabling to keep the electric and magnetic field from emanating out into your living space through the wall. It projects out like 6 to 8 feet. In residential construction, that's more lax and you don't have to use shielded wiring. So anytime you can, go with shielded wiring. People who become electrically sensitive can be harmed by that other form of man-made dirty electricity or magnetic field that comes off the walls. So if you're going to use an Ethernet cable, just get one that says shielded. And then there's this little thing called an Ethernet switch, which is, you can think of it as like an extension cord for electronics. And you can plug in as many short cables as you want. I have one here that has 5. In a classroom, it could have 28 or 30 ports on it. And then you just get a little cable for your individual devices. You might have a cell phone. Who knew? You can buy this cheap little adapter for like 20, 30 bucks and hardwire your cell phone. I use a landline when I'm not on the go because mobile technology was never meant to be used indoors. It was only supposed to be when we're on the go, but the industry found all these new revenue streams to talk us into using wireless indoors. So I have this corded landline phone. I got it at Staples online for like 30 bucks. You can forward your cell phone calls to a landline and then just go into your device and turn off all those antennas. You can do the same thing for your laptops or tablets. Get an Ethernet cable, plug it into an adapter, go in and turn off the radiating antennas, and then you have perfectly safe technology. We recommend that communities or individuals get a radiation detection meter because with the industry pushing 5G and the Internet of Things, they want every electronic device to have a radio frequency transmitter in it. So you won't know unless you measure. My husband, for example, oh my goodness, he just bought us a new stove and it showed up and I saw that it had mobile technology. So you could theoretically turn on your stove on your way home and have it all heated up before you even get home. I think that sounds kind of crazy, but that's where we're going, into crazy land. So I took up my radiation detection meter, and again, we want to be under 10 in our homes. That stove measured at 1,000,090 microwatts per square meter. So I contacted the manufacturer. They sent a rep to my house. He pulled off the back of the stove, and in my case, we were lucky. There was a motherboard behind the digital display on the top of the stove, and next to the motherboard was one little chip card. All he had to do was unplug that, radiation was gone. So it can be that simple, but measuring is the only way to know what your exposures are. So let's take a quick look at what the sources of this radiation are. We've talked about what we can do for our personal devices. In many communities, they're putting utility smart meters on our homes for gas, water, electric, and solar. And when I was a little girl playing hide and seek out in the yard, I'd be hiding behind the bushes and I'd be keeping myself busy watching the little dials go around on the meter. Well, now what they've done is they've taken those good analog meters that lasted for 40 years, and they've started convincing our towns that it's a good idea to replace them with digital meters. And any meter that you have like this that has an FCC ID number on it means it's transmitting radio frequency radiation. We testified before the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities last year. And so I wanted to show them how much radiation was coming out of the 2 meters that we have on my home, because we do have a solar system and an electric system. When I did the math on the pulsations, I was getting hit 17,000 times a day with the radiation off of those meters. So this is very serious. You could have a child on the other side of the wall where that is transmitting. You could have a pregnant woman or an elderly person or somebody with a compromised health condition. And in the really unfortunate scenarios, you could be in a multi-unit dwelling and get the short straw and be on the other side of a whole bank of these smart meters. And at the medical conference, they said that this is one of the leading causes for microwave sickness onset is these smart meters. They pulse radiation continuously. That radiation and the improperly grounded magnetic fields and electric fields, they can hop on your house wires and pipes and basically turn your whole house into a very toxic EMF field. There's too many stories about fires and explosions because these things are not being installed by qualified electricians. They're getting people off the street, luring them with, bonuses and stuff, and just having them go in and flood the neighborhood with these things. So for those who care about data privacy, this is a big issue because your data is literally flying through the air. And anybody with like $100 application could be outside in their car following your usage patterns and know when you're not home. So they can back up their truck to your house and take all your toys. So this has many, many areas of concern for us all. And it's also an environmental justice issue here in Worcester, Massachusetts. National Grid went in and said, oh, we're going to do the smart grid. And they put all these toxic meters on everybody's homes. They did not give them informed consent. People got sick. They went way over budget. So our Attorney General Maura Healey's office got involved, but they only knew to look at the economic side of it, not the health issue. But that's what these industries do. They go into environmental justice communities. They peddle their toxic products where families are working 2 or 3 jobs just to get food on the table and a roof over their heads. They don't have time to pay attention to what's going on in their communities in some cases. And so these industries will come in, peddle their toxic wares, and then say, hey, look, it was so successful here. Now we're going to roll it out across your state. National Grid is also doing that and saying, hey, Rhode Island, hey, New York, look how great we did in Massachusetts. And they just have fraudulent data like you wouldn't believe. But that's what these industries are. Jeremy Johnson is an engineer from Silicon Valley, married to a medical doctor. He had the misfortune of living in his condo where they had put a whole bank of smart meters down below his unit. And he and his wife both got terribly ill. And in all of her medical training, she didn't even know about this. And it took them a while, but they are now permanently damaged from this microwave radiation. Some of it can be reversed, some of it cannot. So it's not something you want to take a chance with. But Jeremy actually did a TED talk for about 15 minutes. So that's a really nice way to introduce engineers and others to this conversation who have only been taught you have to have heat from a device to have harm. So that's what the FCC set our public radiation standards to. They allow this much radiation. They say, how much heat does it take from a device in 6 minutes or in 30 minutes to raise the temperature of your skin? So it's only based on the thermal effect. But what the science is showing is there are biological effects at hundreds of thousands, if not millions of times lower, way down low than what the FCC is still allowing. Cell towers are the next source that you and I don't have direct control over. It's critical when we have these conversations to look at the non-industry funded science, because again, the industry will do their own science under conditions that would deliberately show no harm. Again, the big tobacco playbook. But in my attempt to get my head around all this and to be able to keep track of data that I found that I might need to use later, being a technical writer, I just started my own very simple research repository, and I called it Understanding EMFs because I wanted to understand what these electromagnetic fields are. And I have a page on cell towers. And in the scientific literature, when you look at the death curve, it starts coming down at around 500 meters, which is 1,640 feet. Inside that area, we see increased death rates, neurotoxicity, insomnia, and all sorts of horrible symptoms from microwave radiation. It doesn't actually catch up to the general population rates until about 1,000 meters, which is about 3,000 feet. So mind you, there is no safe level of microwave radiation in the scientific literature. So we don't want to give ourselves a false sense of security, but we do want to try and create as much distance as possible. And there's a website called antennasearch.com. You can put your address in, or your work address, or your kids or your grandkids' school addresses, and it will return for you a 3-mile radius of where all the big cell towers and the big cell antennas are. And at the point that I did this for Boston, I put in the State House address, and oh gosh, poor Boston is so electro-polluted. It could only return a 1-mile radius instead of 3. In that 1 mile in downtown Boston, there were 70 cell towers with 1,184 antennas mounted on the towers, or you probably noticed they've encroached and put them actually on buildings, on the sides of buildings and on the rooftops. And those poor people inside those buildings, I can't even imagine the suffering that they are unwittingly going through and have no idea what's causing it. So this is a nice resource. So you can go start gathering your data, see how much exposure you have. And I've heard it captures most of the macro or the big cell antennas, but maybe not all. Now the industry is spinning up this 5G or 5th generation technology, which sounds fairly innocuous, but it's not. It's a whole new usage of a different section of something called the electromagnetic spectrum. So right now, for your cell phone, that's using some pretty long microwaves to come into your building. They've pretty much maximized what they can monetize off of that. All that's left of the spectrum are these dinky little millimeter waves. So the industry is spinning it up that you will have faster entertainment downloads, that will have smart cities, super highways. But notice who's buying up the entertainment industry as they're pushing all these streaming downloads. It's the wireless industry and their parent companies. So that's a whole nother revenue stream for them. So 5G does not replace the longer waves. It can't work without them. So this is an added layer onto what we'd already had in our toxic world. So one of the shortcomings of 5G is using these little millimeter waves. They can't go very far and they can't go through objects very well. So the industry's solution is to put them in every 2 to 12 houses. Literally a cell tower in your front yard, your backyard, every 2 to 12 houses. So they can hook up with all of your 5G phones and the Internet of Things that they're seducing us all into buying. I've gotten reports out of Maine and elsewhere where they will literally come in overnight and they will lop off the trees or remove them altogether so that these little millimeter waves can get by, because tree leaves, rain, snow can all derail these little dinky millimeter waves. So 5G is just a really, really bad idea. And here's the kicker. US Senator Richard Blumenthal from Connecticut was in a congressional hearing with the Commerce Committee, and he said to these 2 members of the industry, so please share with us, how much funding have you invested to make sure that this is safe before you brought it to market? And these 2 guys kind of hemmed and hawed and then ultimately admitted, we don't know of any research to show that this is safe. So Blumenthal said, so as far as health and safety is concerned, we're basically flying blind here. So that's what we've done. Computer World and others are already reporting that 5G is a bad joke. We are not getting any better signal or faster speeds than what we already had with 4G. But again, this is a new revenue stream for the industry. And in January, Verizon put out a lot of publicity that they just exposed 100 million people to 5G in the cities where they're densifying these small cell millimeter antennas. And those small cells that they're putting up there also have now close range 4G antennas in them. So we're getting walloped when they put these things into our communities. And Dr. Beverly Rubik and Dr. Rob Brown collaborated and put out a paper and ran the data and said, in these areas where we have put 5G in, we are seeing increased rates of COVID cases and of COVID deaths. And once you understand the science, that comes as no surprise because it is an immunosuppressant. Radio frequency is an immunosuppressant. And when your body's already fighting everything as is, there's not much energy left in your cells to conquer something like a virus. So, this little map here is all different dots for all the small cells right in Boston, in addition to the 1,000 macro cells that we saw earlier. So we're getting into this pretty deep. Dr. Magda Havas up in Canada, professor emeritus at Trent University, she taught electromagnetism there for 2.5 decades. She recognizes that our governments by and large have dropped the ball and they are not measuring all these cumulative exposures in our society. So she's asking citizens all across the globe to invest in one of these meters, and Rob Metzinger, who makes this meter, is offering a discount. It retails for $385, but I got this from him for $308 and there was no shipping or anything. And so I've participated and I've gone out into my community and towns surrounding me. I also went up to New Hampshire when I was down in Atlanta. I took readings and put them in her database so that people can see where these radiation exposure levels are high. Or she calls this project brag. Can you brag about your community? B is for black, where it's very high. R is for red, where it's high. A is for amber, where it's medium. And G is for green, where it's low. You may see that indoors, we want to be at 10 or below. The scientists have determined that if we could even be at 1,000 outdoors, that wouldn't be so bad, presuming you get to go home and have a safe environment to do that proper detox and cell repair and regeneration while you sleep. So if anybody's interested in being a citizen scientist with Dr. Havish, she would love to have more people join this effort. And you can go out to global EMF.net. So just to give you an idea of what some of these outdoor measurements look like, again, we want to be less than 1,000. Up in New Hampshire, a resident took a reading at their firehouse, 417, looking pretty good. Keene, New Hampshire, getting into the amber. Nashua, New Hampshire, getting into the red. Concord, Stratham, cell tower running right on this neighborhood and down the main drag. And then in the north end in Boston, a woman who lives down there, she and I went through and did some readings, 613,000 microwatts. And when you go to the north end, you'll see these really pretty, what look like wrought iron street lights. These are small cell towers right at the curb. And when you walk down Hanover Street with all of our lovely Italian restaurants and you look down the side streets, you see these ugly gray monopoles that they stuck up right in front of people's homes. Because there's, this community in the north end started when the immigrants came to Boston. And we've still got a lot of little old people up there from World War I, World War II, living right at eye level with what they've now put in with these cell towers right at the curb. So this is happening already, and it would behoove us all to start learning where our towns are. So Martin Luther King Jr. taught us that when we make meaningful changes in society, it comes through 3 channels. The public engages, which is why I'm so honored to be with you here tonight to share the information. The courts ultimately rule, and in this case, we want the science to catch up, and public policy is enacted to protect our communities. So I'll give you a quick overview of what's happening in all 3 of those areas because there's some stellar work going on with all of it. Senator Ed Markey worked with our Government Accountability Office back in 2012. And in 2013, he had the FCC open up a docket because it looked like their FCC public radiation exposure limits were out of date for the science. They opened up that docket at the FCC and they left it open for 6 years. In that time, scientists, doctors, and citizens who've been harmed poured in a ton of evidence of harm in there. And, you know, we've got that Jeffrey Shuren over there at the FDA who said to the FCC, no problem, keep doing what you're doing. Well, as soon as the FCC filed that decision in something called the public or the Federal Register, then the lawsuits could begin. So the Environmental Health Trust and Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s Children's Health Defense, along with others, sued the FCC, and they presented the public record to the courts, to these 3 federal judges in the Ninth Circuit in DC, Court of Appeals. 27 volumes, 11,000 pages of evidence of harm. And the judges said to the FCC, where's your homework? How did you decide that this was okay to keep radiating at these levels? And they did one of these and said, oh, the FDA said it was fine. So the court said, where's the FDA's homework? And not one of our government agencies has ever done the scientific review on this. So it was a victory in the courts. They remanded it back to the FCC and said, you guys have to do better. We still have the fox watching the hen house though. So we hope that that was an important movement of the needle in the right direction, but there's no cavalry coming. There's nobody coming to protect your town, your family, your children, your grandchildren. So we have to come up to speed on this while all these other things play out. So there are many other lawsuits and movements happening at the federal level. Americans for Responsible Technology is a group of grassroots environmental citizens who have these various projects. One of them is Americans for Responsible Technology. They have filed a petition with the FDA that any of us can sign on to. They're asking to declare imminent hazard on wireless radiation, because it is an imminent hazard. So many things happening. The Massachusetts Board of Health legal guidelines now has a 4-page section on cell towers. Sorry. And just last month, the Pittsfield Board of Health ordered a cease and desist on that cell tower that was making the neighborhood so sick. But the industry came in and sued to put an injunction against that order. And the Pittsfield City Councilors would not back their Board of Health and pony up the funding to fight this in court. So we have to really be on top of our towns to force this to happen. So there are many other lawsuits happening that you can go poke around in. So I hope to introduce legislation here in Massachusetts, but New Hampshire has clearly taken the lead. They introduced a bill with very pointed questions. Lloyd's of London, Swiss Re, and others have already put exclusions for radio frequency electromagnetic fields in their policies. They won't cover damages. So that leaves our towns and our schools vulnerable to legal action. Why does that fine print say to keep it away from the body? Why is the FCC dropping the ball? Why do we allow 100 times more radiation than other countries? And why is nobody looking at the cumulative effect from all these different directions that we're getting radiated? So I've had legislation going here for many years. Within 7 months, we brought in the experts and got a law passed to investigate. And this groundbreaking commission report is the best in our nation today. In the first 17 pages, they document the corruption with our federal agencies and the industry. And then they make 15 recommendations to hardwire. We should not be investing in anything wireless again in our communities. We should do fiber first, fiber optics to and through the premises, and then just pick up with Ethernet cables indoors. So Dr. Kent Chamberlain served on that commission along with medical doctors, engineers, very highly qualified professionals to assess the science. Dr. Chamberlain is now, he was active at the time, but now he's the professor and chair emeritus for the University of New Hampshire's Department of Computer and Electrical Engineering. He worked with EMFs for 30 years and he had no idea, but he's a good man and he did his due diligence. And once he looked, researched, and spoke to the experts, he's now done a complete about face saying, we have got to get this right. So he's done some good presentations that you can look at here. And he always provides his slides with the links to go right into everything that he says for research. So this year in January, New Hampshire introduced another bill to start implementing some of those recommendations. You can only, eat the elephant one bite at a time. The first two that they bit off, and God bless this Rep. Patrick Abrami, he's just been remarkable. It's a bipartisan bill. They want these setbacks. Remember, we talked about 500 meters being the point at which the death rate starts to come down. And then a registry of harm, because right now there's nowhere you can go if you're harmed. Who can you tell? So they want a registry of harm at the state level to be paid for by industry. And Dr. Chamberlain did a separate video here to talk about this setback. They didn't just make that number up. That's completely backed by science. And then in New Hampshire, their hearings are all done transparently. You can watch the videos from all of those hearings. And all over, I'll just give you examples from here in Massachusetts, but there are 150 national groups at Americans for Responsible Technology that are doing similar things. We've gotten citizens have worked with their towns to get setbacks in their local zoning bylaws. And it's critical that we do that, because if you don't, then you're just a sitting duck. And just last night, I mentioned that the Pittsfield City Council dropped the ball on their Board of Health and they didn't back them up on the cease and desist order. But last night, the woman who's been leading this charge in Pittsfield, Courtney Gilardi, she put forth a World EHS or Electrohypersensitivity Day resolution, because tomorrow is the World EHS Day. And we're doing a program tomorrow night at 8 o'clock where we're going to be raising the voices of the invisibly harmed. So we'll have a dozen people who will share their stories with you. They had no idea this was going to take them down, but you'll hear directly from people who have been harmed. And to Pittsfield's credit, they voted, I think, 10-1 last night to call June 16th World EHS Day for 2022 in their town. So that was a little bit of a gimme bone. They need to do much more work, but at least it's a step in the right direction. So a woman in Centerville, where they put church steeple antennas in, they turned them on this past year and she started getting sicker and sicker. And I heard from her sister this week that she's now landed in the emergency room. So this is very serious. And we just want you to know so you can start thinking about how you might protect yourself. But we won't go through all of this, but in Burlington, they did a citywide policy committee and came up with a small cell policy that's been emulated by other towns in Massachusetts, and it gets better and better with every iteration. So we have lots of resources for you to have these conversations with your towns. In Easton, Connecticut, there was a grandmother who figured out what 5G is. She talked to her town about it. They did their investigation and said, we're putting a moratorium on 5G until it can be proven safe. And that was a couple of years ago. And just this last month in May, they voted again to extend that ban on 5G. So there is stuff you can do, even though our towns have all been told, nope, nothing you can do. There is, we just need to bring the information. So these kinds of actions are happening all over the world, and you can go take a look at that. So the industry, as I mentioned, penetrated our schools with their 21st Century Classroom campaign. Their goal was to have a one-to-one device in the hands of every child. And lo and behold, the pandemic provided just that opportunity. We should know that the New York Times did a series of articles talking about what Silicon Valley execs are doing with their children. They're sending their children to schools with no screens, not hardwired, not wireless, but no screens, because they know that a child's brain develops best through meaningful interactions with trusted adults, other children, and their environment. And in fact, they've gone so far as to having their nannies sign contracts that there will be no screens around their children. So Tech Safe Schools is another project that was just launched recently. They've got a wonderful set of resources there for you to open up the conversation. They will even send letters to your schools to help open that conversation. So terrific resources at Tech Safe Schools, because our schools should all be hardwired without wireless radiation indoors. And we shouldn't be allowing cell towers or small cells anywhere near the school properties. So I mentioned that we have our little wireless education course. The Environmental Health Trust, which has this incredible database, they've got a lot of really great printable resources, postcards, flyers, brochures that your doctors can put in their offices. They worked with Maryland, which became the first public health agency in the nation to recommend hardwiring schools. And then there's something called the US Collaborative for High Performance Schools that gives schools green ratings. And Dr. Tony Stein, she worked with them and came up with a module for low EMF best practices, not only for the radio frequency, but also for those electric and magnetic fields that can also be toxic if not installed properly. And then when the pandemic hit, other countries, Russia, Cyprus, and others, put out public safety recommendations to keep the kids safe at home. Hardwire your technology and turn off the radiation. If you can't hardwire, then at least keep as much distance from the devices when they're radiating, and only turn on the radiating antennas when you absolutely need them. They also have age by age recommendations for how much screen time a child should have. So in the professions, as I mentioned, we now have this EMF medical conference. Dr. Cindy Russell, who's a plastic surgeon out in California, dealing with far too many people with breast cancer and other cancers. She founded Physicians for Safe Technology so that people in the medical fields have a trusted resource to go to start mining around in the data. For engineers and physicists, technologists, architects, one of the outcomes of that Health and Buildings Roundtable conference that we went to is they did a call for papers. So some of the world's leading scientists, doctors, and technologists got together and wrote this paper, Building Science and Radio Frequency Radiation, What Makes Smart and Healthy Buildings. So that's a great paper. There's Jeremy Johnson's TED Talks, and then I've got a page in my research repository for engineers and physicists. So lots of things that we can do for ourselves and our friends. These are the little courses I mentioned. If you're not a do-it-yourselfer, there's a whole profession called building biologists that can be hired to come into your home to do radio frequency remediation. Some are also trained to address the other indoor toxins like the mold and the VOCs and the formaldehyde that off-gas in your spaces. And as I mentioned, this award-winning film Generation Zapped is now available through your libraries in most cases. And it's also available through Amazon Prime now. But this is a really good way to take a look at this issue. It was done filming in 2017, and a lot has happened since then. So I'm being brought in on July 7th. I don't know if this is in anybody's area, but in Harlemville, New York, right over the line from Western Mass, I'm going to go out there and co-host a screening of Generation Zapped and then bring people up to speed with what's happened since that film was released. But that's an excellent resource. Bert Wolf on PBS, he does a travel show. He did 2 separate episodes on radio frequency radiation. And then Americans for Responsible Technology has a whole toolkit that anybody can use. They've got letters to the editor. They've got a sample zoning code that you could take to your town and your town's attorneys. So lots of great resources, yard signs, letters for your neighbors to welcome them into the conversation. So now that we know, it's important to recognize that it's healthy to set limits for ourselves on screen time, but to also recognize that children watch us like hawks And whatever we do gives them permission to do the same. So we need to model good behavior for the children in our world. And I love this little poster here, 50 ways to take a break, because it reminds us of all the great things we used to do before we fell down into sitting in front of a screen all day. But lots of good things. Go play some music, go dancing, go do a random act of kindness for your neighbors, go meditate, go hike around in the woods, all these things that bring us joy and connect us back to nature. So there was another book called, I think it was called Earthing. And that showed there's a whole nother body of science that shows that every living thing on our planet is meant to be directly connected to the earth, because we receive electrons from the earth that go up and help to regulate our biological systems. But now that we walk around in rubber-soled shoes, we sleep off the ground, we drive off the ground, we live off the ground, we by and large lost that connection to the earth. So I read this first book and I'm like, okay, I get it. I understand the science, but I live here in the Northeast. It's not like I can go trucking around barefoot outside for half the year. And then right as the pandemic hit, poor Dr. Conover, she was set to launch this new book called The Earth Prescription. And I was so honored. She reached out and said, hey, would you read my manuscript and let me know what you think? And I loved it because she takes earthing or grounding through all 4 seasons and teaches us how we can do it naturally without actually having to take our shoes off. So for example, if you're out on a walk and you're touching the high water content on a plant, maybe the leaves on a tree or the pine needles, you are instantly grounded through that plant. Or if you have a dog with you and they're on the grass, when you rub the less furry parts, the snout or the ears, you are instantly grounded through your pet. So there's all sorts of cool ways to get this free, natural healing energy from the earth that can help to regulate our own biological systems. And we have a lot of great resources for municipal leaders. So just know all of this is here. And the goal is to get to as low as reasonably achievable. This is the ALARA principle that our Centers for Disease Control and Prevention already has for the other kind of radiation, the ionizing radiation like sunshine and X-rays and gamma rays. Well, we would never leave ourselves or our children exposed 24/7, but that's exactly what we've done with this non-ionizing radiation. So we need to get to as low as reasonably achievable with the wireless radiation too. So all sorts of resources, this policy book called Reinventing Wires, The Future of Landlines and Networks, again, free and online from a policy institute in DC. It goes through a dozen reasons why wireless is a really bad deal for our communities. So know all of that is there when you're ready for it. So again, no safe level. Dr. Linda Birnbaum, who was our leading scientist at the NIH, she oversaw the National Toxicology Program. She has said that there are some really good people at the federal level, but there's an awful lot of agency capture going on as well. And that we really need to drive this up to the federal level to empower them from the state and local. So nobody's sweeping in to fix this for us. It has to come from us. So we want New Hampshire to enact that bill. We need to educate the public. Anybody's welcome to come to our education sessions in hopes of getting New Hampshire to be the first to take meaningful action. We are collaborating with New Hampshire for Safe Technology, and twice a month we're doing free webinars, just like we've done with you tonight, so that people can go out and get current information and learn about this. And I know we present a lot of information, and if you're new to this conversation, it's like drinking water out of a fire hose. So feel free to come back to as many of these webinars as you want, and then welcome others to come with you, be it your loved ones, your colleagues, your state representatives, your municipal leaders, your school leaders. Let's just come together and learn, because that's got to be the first step before we take action. So we have lots of good resources here. I actually wrote an EMF fact sheet with the Massachusetts Department of Public Health way back in 2016 that we were told would be out in 3 months, and it's never seen the light of day. So I think we've got some pretty heavy industry capture at our state levels as well. So next steps, you know, our town should be recognizing that technology is here to stay. So let's form committees to do it properly. We should be talking to our towns about not allowing these toxic smart meters onto our homes, stop it where it is right now, and give the option to put a non-transmitting analog meter on. And tell our towns, don't be afraid to hire a good attorney, because most of our town attorneys have no idea how to work with the Telecom Act. But somebody like Andrew Campanelli and others, this is what they do. They get in there and they work really hard to bring our bylaws up to snuff so that our towns are as protected as they can be within the law. So next steps, educate the community, continue with forums like we've done tonight, and start where you are. You know, you might belong to professional associations, or you might belong to a company that would like to have me come in and give a talk. So wherever you can help to get word out, I would be honored to be brought in. But for today, think about what you can do. Start noticing, start looking around where your wireless exposures are, and then start with baby steps. Creating a sleep sanctuary is probably the most important thing you can do to protect your sleep so your body can keep you strong. Ethernet cables and adapters, it's not rocket science. It's not rocket science. And these fact sheets are from the Environmental Health Trust. So they've got great things to help us remember what it is that we're trying to do. And when you're not using a device, keep it in airplane mode and only turn on the antenna that you need at the time that you need it. So you're welcome to check in with us at Mass for Safe Technology, New Hampshire for Safe Technology, and I will stop the screen share here and see if anybody has any questions. Oh, this is great. So some nice comments in there. Thank you, guys. I appreciate what you put in there. But if anybody wants to raise their hand, I can take questions. I know you're probably all blown out of the water at this point. I saw you. Colin, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hey, Cecilia, nice to meet you, and thank you very much for sharing all this incredible information. How can we contact you directly in the event that we want to engage you in a group presentation?
Sure. I will put my email address right in the chat. It's safetech@gmail.com.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Ellen.
Cece, you had talked about with the EMFs that it can cause teeth to break off.
Mm-hmm.
All of our devices are hardwired. Would that make a difference? Would there be another reason?
If they're hardwired, have you also turned off the antennas?
I don't know. I'm gonna have to find out.
Yeah, get a meter and measure. That's really the only way to know if you're still being exposed. And there could be other health issues going on that would cause your teeth to decay like that.
Yep.
But I just remember Peter Sullivan saying that was one of his big signs.
Yeah, we do have a meter, and there was a lot of it coming off of my husband's his screen, so we replaced it. But I'll have to find out. I'll talk to him about it.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Thank you
You're
very much.
welcome.
Very interesting.
Yeah, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
You'll never be looking at your world the same again.
Oh, that's for sure.
Any other questions? I know I kept you guys a little bit later than probably you wanted to stay, but I appreciate you giving me that time so I could do kind of a comprehensive review.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
If anybody wants to chat, save the chat before we sign off. A lot of links.
Yeah, that little ... down in the bottom right corner.
Right.
How to save that chat in case folks aren't aware.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
All right,
Yeah.
everybody. Lorraine, did you have a question?
Yes, I do have a question. Have you done any studies on some of these 5G phones? You can lower to a different frequency. I have mine set on 2.4.
Mhm.
Is there any literature on lowering the amount
Well, you're wise to reduce your exposures to as low as reasonably achievable, but there is no safe level of microwave radiation. But I had my husband's old beat up Samsung Galaxy 3, and our carrier was retiring the 3G signals because they want to repurpose them to blend them into the frequencies that they're using for 5G.
Uh-huh.
So I received a notice saying, we're going to offer you a different phone, come down to the store. So I did. And while I was there, it was kind of slow that day. So I said to the guys, you know, whatever phone I walk out of here with, I want to be sure I can connect it through an adapter. I said, do you want to know why? So I got to chatting with these two young men. One of them had already upgraded to the 5G iPhone. And we measured it because I had my meter with me. And it went off the top of my chart on my meter, which goes to 2.5 million.
Mm-hmm.
When he turned on those 5G antennas, it went up beyond 2.5 million. So, you know, turn it off. If you don't need it, turn it off.
Yeah, and I don't need any more radiation exposure. I work
Right.
with cesium and cobalt. Oh,
Anybody else?
Yeah. Dennis, do you want to put a link in the chat to where people, to whatever page you're going to post this recording to?
That's what I was going to do is put my email, and if anybody wants to receive this, then give it to me and I'll send it to them directly, as well as putting it on the New England support group.
Okay. That would be great.
So that's what I'll do.
We'll put it on the Life Force chat group too.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, and Robert, thank you. Is Robert still with us? We had our monthly Massachusetts for Safe Technology meeting at noon today. And I let folks know that Susan Foster is tracking incidents where they've been denied accommodations at the federal level because of their electrical sensitivities. And so I think they're starting to work on that to try and make it so people who get sick from this get a disability accommodation. So Robert popped something into the chat about that, to contact Susan Foster if you've ever been denied federal accommodations. Jerry.
Hi there, Cece, thank you for coming. Could you put in the chat that monthly where they register and then they can join that meeting? Every month?
Yes, but it's a different Zoom link every month. So what you can do is go out and sign up with Massachusetts for Safe Technology, and that will put you on my list, and then you will get notices sent to you for that meeting.
Okay, yeah. And yeah, we shared that all over our mass assembly where they can register
Yeah.
for that meeting. So we did do that. We'll repost that. So
Okay,
then they'll
good.
be on your email list, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And thanks for coming again today. It was nice to see your face twice.
Twice a
Anybody,
day.
anybody have anything else to say?
Okay, everybody.
Questions,
Thanks so much.
answers? Great.
Have a lovely
Cecilia, thank you
evening.
very much.
Yeah, and if anybody wants to reach out to me, feel free to pop questions my way, okay?
Wonderful.
okay.
Good.
Thank you.
And thank you,
All right.
everyone who came tonight.
Yep.
Have a wonderful evening.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
It was
Bye now.
terrific. Yep, bye-bye.
Yep. Thanks, Dennis.